What's the most insane thing your ex did after the breakup? I thought my ex Priscilla was handling our breakup pretty well when she told me she was moving to Japan for a teaching job. She posted photos of her farewell party on Instagram and even told everyone her psychosis wasn't making her act out anymore. Then came that Saturday morning 6 months later that still makes me throw up when I think about it. I'd gone out with my buddies the night before and got destroyed at this new bar downtown. My head was pounding, and the girl I'd been seeing for a few weeks was asleep next to me in the morning. But then the buzzer for my apartment started going off at 8 a.m. Not just a quick buzz either, but someone holding it down. I stumbled out of bed in my boxers, trying not to wake up Macy while my brain felt like it was splitting in half. The buzzing wouldn't stop, so I finally hit the intercom, ready to yell at whatever delivery guy thought this was acceptable. Before I could say anything, I heard Priscilla's voice through the speaker. My ex-girlfriend, who was supposed to be teaching English to Japanese children, was standing outside my building. She was talking fast, saying she needed to come up right away, and that she'd explain everything. My hungover brain couldn't process what was happening, so I just stood there in silence while she kept buzzing. Macy woke up and asked who was at the door so early. I couldn't exactly tell her my ex had apparently flown across the Pacific Ocean to show up unannounced, so I mumbled something about a package. Meanwhile, Priscilla started yelling through the intercom that she could see my light was on and she knew I was home. Other tenants were probably getting annoyed by the constant buzzing. I finally pressed the button and told Priscilla this wasn't a good time. That's when she dropped the bomb that she was standing there with all her luggage straight from the airport. She said her flight had just landed and she'd taken an Uber directly to my apartment. She hadn't even stopped at a hotel or anywhere else first, just flew 15 hours from Japan to show up at my door. Against every instinct in my body, I buzzed her in. What else could I do with her standing on the street with suitcases at 8 in the morning? I threw on a t-shirt and shorts while Massey asked what was going on. I told her to stay in bed, and I'd handle whatever this was. My hands were shaking from the hangover and the absolute insanity of the situation. Priscilla appeared at my door, dragging 2 massive suitcases and carrying a backpack. She looked exactly the same, except her hair was shorter. She smiled at me like showing up unannounced from Japan was totally normal behavior. I blocked the doorway while she tried to roll her suitcases inside. She started rambling about how teaching abroad had made her realize what really mattered. She said she'd thought about me every single day and knew we were meant to be together. The whole time she was trying to push past me with her luggage like she was moving back in. She kept saying she'd made a mistake and that long distance had given her perspective. I tried to explain that she couldn't just show up like this. I told her we'd broken up for good reasons and that I'd moved on with my life. She wasn't listening, though. She pushed harder with her suitcase, and that's when she saw Macy's purse on my kitchen counter. Her face changed completely, and she dropped her luggage handle with a loud thud. Priscilla pushed past me and walked into my studio apartment like she still lived there. She saw Mackie's shoes by the door and a wine glass with lipstick marks from the night before. Without asking, she opened my bathroom door and found Massey's makeup bag on the sink. The whole time I was following her around, telling her she needed to leave while my head felt like it was going to explode. That's when Massey came out of the bedroom wearing my old college t-shirt and nothing else. She froze when she saw Priscilla standing in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by international luggage. The 3 of us just stared at each other in the world's most awkward triangle. My hangover was hitting peak levels, and I thought I might actually throw up right there. Priscilla looked between me and Macy with this manic smile. Then she said the words that still haunt my nightmares years later. She clapped her hands together like she'd just had the best idea and asked with complete seriousness, "So can I join the party?" Macy took 3 steps backward with her hands raised like she was facing down a wild animal. Priscilla kept that crazy smile plastered on her face while she started explaining how she'd seen this kind of arrangement work perfectly in Tokyo. She was talking about how Japanese culture understood that love didn't have to follow Western rules, and how modern people were more open-minded. My stomach started doing flips as I watched her gesture between the 3 of us, like she was proposing we order pizza together, instead of whatever insane thing she was actually suggesting. Macy's eyes got wider with each word coming out of Priscilla's mouth. She grabbed her jeans from the floor and started backing toward the bathroom while Priscilla kept rambling about polyamory being the future. I moved between them and put my hand up to stop Priscilla from following Macy. I told her she needed to leave right now and this wasn't happening. She reached for my arm, but I yanked it away before she could touch me. Macy was grabbing her stuff from around the apartment, shoving her phone charger and earrings into her purse with shaking hands. The whole tiny studio felt like it was about to explode from the tension. Priscilla's face crumpled and tears started streaming down her cheeks. She dropped to her knees right next to her massive suitcases and started sobbing about flying 15 hours just to see me. Her shoulders were shaking as she clutched at the handle of her luggage and kept saying she'd given up everything in Japan for us. She was gasping between sobs about how she'd quit her job and sold all her furniture because she knew we were meant to be together. Macy slipped into the bathroom with her clothes bundled in her arms while I stood there frozen, watching my ex have a complete breakdown on my floor. The neighbor started pounding on the wall so hard that my framed poster of The Office rattled. He was yelling something about Saturday morning and keeping it down, but Priscilla's crying just got louder. She started hyperventilating and clutching at her chest like she couldn't breathe. Her face was turning red, and she was making these horrible gasping sounds. Even though every part of me wanted to run away, I knelt down next to her to make sure she wasn't actually dying. I kept my hands to myself, but asked if she needed water or her inhaler or something. She just kept gasping and crying harder. Masi came out of the bathroom fully dressed with her purse over her shoulder. She looked at me kneeling next to my sobbing ex, and her face showed hurt mixed with confusion. She stepped carefully around Priscilla's open suitcase that was blocking half the apartment. She told me she was leaving and needed time to process whatever this was. I started to stand up to explain, but there was literally no way to explain this disaster. Macy's eyes were shiny like she might cry too, as she grabbed her shoes from by the door. I wanted to follow her, but Priscilla was still hyperventilating on my floor. Macy opened the door and looked back at me one more time before walking out. The second the door clicked shut, Priscilla's crying stopped like someone hit a switch. She stood up and wiped her face with the back of her hand like nothing had happened. She grabbed the handle of her biggest suitcase and started dragging it toward my bed while talking about how jet-lagged she was. She said she just needed to rest for a few hours, and then we could talk about everything properly. I jumped in front of her and blocked the path to my bed. I told her absolutely not, she couldn't stay here. She tried to push past me with her suitcase, but I stood firm. Her face went from fake sweet to angry in about 2 seconds. She started yelling that I owed her after everything we'd been through together. She brought up every time she'd had a psychosis episode, and I'd helped her through it. She reminded me about the time I'd promised to always be there for her when she was in the hospital. She said I was being cruel after she'd flown halfway around the world. My head was pounding worse with every word, and her voice kept getting louder and higher. The hangover mixed with her yelling was making me feel like I might puke. She kept listing every nice thing she'd ever done for me, and every promise I'd supposedly made. I pulled out my phone and told her I was calling someone to pick her up if she wouldn't leave on her own. She actually laughed at that and said she had nowhere to go. She explained that she'd given up her apartment before moving to Japan and hadn't bothered booking a hotel because she knew I'd take her back. The weight of this disaster kept getting heavier as I realized she'd literally burned every bridge to trap me. My phone buzzed with a text from Kenta asking if everything was okay because he could hear yelling from outside the building. I texted back that I needed his help urgently with about 15 exclamation points. He replied that he was coming up right away. Just knowing backup was on the way made me feel slightly less trapped in my own apartment. Kenta showed up within 2 minutes and knocked on my door. I opened it, and he took one look at the scene and understood immediately. Priscilla tried to switch to her sweet voice and started explaining to Kenta how this was all a misunderstanding. She batted her eyes at him and said she was just tired from her flight. Kenta wasn't buying any of it, though. He calmly told Priscilla she needed to leave the apartment right now. He stood next to me like a wall of support while she tried different tactics to convince him. She went from sweet to angry to crying again, but Kenta just kept repeating that she had to go. She finally threw her hands up and said fine, she'd leave, but she needed to use the bathroom first since she'd been traveling for hours. I didn't want to let her deeper into my apartment, but she was already pushing past me toward the bathroom door. Kenta gave me a look that said we should just let her go so this would end faster. While she was in there with the door locked, we could hear her talking to herself, her voice going up and down like she was having a full conversation with someone who wasn't there. Kenta grabbed one of her suitcases and started dragging it toward my apartment door while I grabbed the other one. We got both bags out into the hallway along with her backpack, working fast before she came back out. The bathroom door opened and she walked out looking calm until she saw her luggage sitting in the hallway through my open door. Her face went red and she started screaming that we were thieves trying to steal her things. She ran to her bags and dropped to her knees, unzipping them to check if anything was missing while yelling loud enough for the whole building to hear. That's when Remy Tanaka, our building manager, came up the stairs asking what all the noise was about on a Saturday morning. I tried to explain that my ex had shown up from Japan without warning, while Priscilla kept talking over me, telling Remy that I'd invited her and now I was throwing her out after she'd flown 15 hours. Remy looked at the scene with Priscilla on the floor surrounded by open suitcases, then looked at me and Kenta standing in my doorway, and her face got serious. She told Priscilla she needed to leave the property right now, or she'd call the police for trespassing. Priscilla's whole attitude changed instantly, like someone flipped a switch and she stood up with this fake calm smile. She said of course she'd go to a hotel, that she didn't mean to cause any trouble, and started zipping up her bags with slow, careful movements, like she was trying to show how dignified she was. She picked up both suitcase handles and her backpack, holding her head high as she walked to the elevator without looking back at any of us. The second the elevator doors closed, my stomach finally gave up the fight and I ran to my kitchen sink, where I threw up everything from last night plus what felt like my actual organs. Kenta got me a glass of water and rubbed my back while I stood there shaking over the sink, my whole body feeling like it might fall apart. Remy said she'd put a note in the building system that Priscilla wasn't allowed in without my permission and that security should watch for her. She patted my shoulder before leaving, telling me to get some rest and drink more water. I collapsed on my couch and pulled out my phone to find 23 texts from Priscilla that had come in just during the time she was in the elevator and walking outside. She was sending me hotel names and room numbers, telling me where she'd be staying, asking me to come talk to her when I was ready. Then I opened Instagram, and my stomach dropped again seeing that she'd tagged me in 12 old photos from when we were together, each with long captions about true love and second chances, and how distance makes the heart grow stronger. My friends were already commenting, asking if we were back together, and my cousin had texted, asking what was going on with all the posts. I scrolled through photo after photo of us from 2 years ago at restaurants, on trips, at parties, all suddenly public again for everyone to see our history. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Masi saying she needed space and didn't want to talk for a while. She said she wasn't mad at me, but the whole situation was too much drama for someone she'd only been seeing for 3 weeks, and she needed to think about whether this was something she wanted to deal with. My heart sank, but I couldn't blame her at all for wanting to stay away from this disaster. Kenta took my phone and started helping me block Priscilla on every social media platform, going through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn, where she'd apparently been viewing my profile repeatedly. We blocked her phone number and her email addresses, all 3 of them that I knew about. He set my profiles to private and started screenshotting all the posts she'd made in case I needed them later for legal stuff. Kenta said I should really think about getting a restraining order and offered to go with me to figure out how to do that. We spent the whole afternoon documenting everything, writing down times and dates, saving texts and voicemails, making sure we had a record of her showing up uninvited from another country. That night I couldn't sleep at all, jumping at every sound in the hallway, checking my door locks every 20 minutes, convinced I could hear her voice through the walls, even though I knew she wasn't there. My apartment, that used to feel safe and comfortable, now felt like somewhere anyone could just show up at, like the walls were made of paper, and the locks were just suggestions. Sunday morning, my phone buzzed with texts from a number I didn't recognize, and when I opened them, there were 5 photos of Priscilla sitting on the hood of my car in my work parking lot with coffee and pastries spread out like she was having a picnic. She was smiling at the camera and had written that she'd wait there all day if she had to, that we needed to talk about us. I called Kenta instead of responding, and he told me to stay home, that he'd drive by my work to see if she was really there. Monday morning, my supervisor pulled me aside and asked if everything was all right, because I'd seemed distracted and made 3 mistakes on simple tasks that I never messed up. I gave her a vague explanation about some personal issues going on, and she said to let her know if I needed any time off to deal with whatever it was. I pulled out my phone during lunch break and started searching for therapists who took my insurance. Found this woman named Natasha Volkov, who specialized in relationship trauma and stalking victims. Her office had an opening that same afternoon, so I took it. Walking into her office felt weird because I'd never done therapy before, but I needed someone professional to tell me I wasn't crazy for feeling this messed up. Natasha was this older Russian woman with thick glasses who listened to everything without interrupting once. When I finished explaining the whole Japan situation and the apartment buzzing and everything else, she leaned forward and told me straight up that what Priscilla was doing was textbook stalking and harassment. Hearing a professional say those words made something click in my brain. I wasn't overreacting or being dramatic. This was actually serious. She helped me understand that Priscilla's mental health issues didn't give her the right to destroy my life. We made another appointment for next week, and she gave me some breathing exercises to help with the anxiety that kept hitting me at random times. That evening, my phone rang from a Seattle number I didn't recognize. Turned out to be Milo Suzuki, Priscilla's older brother who I'd met a couple times when we were dating. He sounded worried and confused, asking if I knew where Priscilla was because she'd called him asking for money but wouldn't say why. My stomach dropped as I told him she'd left Japan and showed up at my apartment. He went silent for a long moment, then said he had no idea she'd even quit her teaching job. We talked for 20 minutes about her behavior, and he mentioned she'd had similar episodes before, usually when she stopped taking her medication. He gave me his number and said to call if anything else happened, because he wanted to help get her stable again. Tuesday night around 2 a.m., the buzzer started going off again. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, not moving, not answering, just listening to that awful sound echoing through my apartment. It went on for 15 minutes before finally stopping. The next morning, Remy texted me that she'd reviewed the security footage and caught Priscilla trying different apartment buzzers after mine didn't work. She was officially banned from the property now, and Remy had put her photo at the security desk. The building management was taking this seriously, which made me feel slightly safer. I spent Wednesday morning at a legal aid office downtown, trying to figure out how to get a protection order. The counselor there was this patient woman who walked me through all the paperwork while I tried not to shake. The process was way more complicated than I expected, with forms about incidents and evidence and court dates. She said all the documentation Kenta and I had collected would really help my case. We went through everything chronologically: the surprise arrival from Japan, the Instagram posts, the parking lot photos, the repeated buzzing, all of it. She helped me write it out in legal language that would make sense to a judge. Thursday afternoon, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize, but I knew it was Priscilla immediately from the subject line about true love. She'd written this long, rambling letter about her time in Japan and how lonely she'd been teaching kids who didn't understand her. She admitted she'd stopped taking her medication 3 months ago because it made her feel numb and disconnected from her emotions. She wanted to feel everything fully, she wrote, especially her love for me. The email went on for pages about destiny and soulmates and how the universe had brought us together. I forwarded the whole thing to Milo without responding to her. He called an hour later saying this confirmed what he'd suspected about the medication. Friday was my second session with Natasha, and we spent the whole time practicing how to set boundaries. She had me role-play different scenarios where Priscilla might approach me at work or the store or my apartment. At first, I kept over-explaining why I couldn't talk to her, giving long reasons and apologies. Natasha taught me to just say no and stop talking. No explanation needed. We practiced until I could say it firmly without my voice shaking. She reminded me that I didn't owe Priscilla anything, not even an explanation. Saturday afternoon, Kenta called to tell me he'd seen Priscilla at our usual grocery store, clearly hanging around the entrance watching for me. He'd been going to grab beer but saw her first and started taking photos for documentation. She stayed there for an hour before finally leaving when it was obvious I wasn't coming. The fact that she was stalking my regular spots made me feel trapped in my own neighborhood. I started changing my routines, shopping at different stores, taking different routes to work, anything to avoid running into her. Monday morning, Milo called to say he was flying in from Seattle to deal with his sister. He'd found her at some hotel downtown and convinced her to see a psychiatrist with him. She'd agreed, but kept insisting she was fine, and everyone was overreacting about normal relationship stuff. Milo said she genuinely didn't seem to understand why showing up from Japan was inappropriate. The psychiatrist appointment was Tuesday, and Milo promised to update me afterward. Wednesday was the court date for the protection order, and my hands were sweating as I walked into the courthouse. Priscilla was already there with Milo, looking more put together than she had in weeks. She'd clearly showered and put on nice clothes, probably at Milo's insistence. She kept trying to make eye contact with me across the courtroom, but I stared straight ahead at the judge's bench. The judge was this older woman who reviewed all the evidence slowly and carefully. She looked at the photos, read the emails, checked the documentation of every incident. Priscilla started crying when the judge asked her about leaving Japan without telling anyone. Milo kept his hand on her shoulder, keeping her calm enough to answer questions. After 40 minutes of testimony and evidence review, the judge granted a 6-month protection order. Priscilla had to stay 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. She also had to maintain mental health treatment as a requirement. The judge explained everything clearly, while Priscilla sobbed quietly, and Milo nodded along. Walking out of that courthouse felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. The first few days after court, I kept checking my phone expecting angry texts or calls, but nothing came. My apartment felt weird without the constant worry of Priscilla showing up. I actually slept through the night on day 3 without waking up to check the door locks. By the end of the first week, I could walk to the corner store without looking over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Kenta noticed the change too when he came over that weekend with pizza and beer. He looked around my place and laughed, saying it didn't feel like Fort Knox anymore, with all the extra locks I'd installed. 2 weeks passed without any sign of Priscilla, and my shoulders finally started to drop from around my ears. Work got easier when I could actually focus on my computer screen instead of watching the parking lot. My supervisor even commented that I seemed more like myself again during our team meeting. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Massey, asking if I wanted to grab coffee. She'd heard about the protection order through some mutual friends from that bar we used to go to. I met her at this little place near her office on a Thursday afternoon. She looked good and seemed happy, which made me feel less guilty about the whole mess. She told me she was glad I got the legal help I needed, and that nobody deserved to deal with that kind of chaos. We talked for an hour about normal stuff like work and movies, and it felt easy. Before she left, she said, maybe we could be friends once enough time passed, and I agreed that sounded nice. The next week, I had my regular session with Natasha, and she could tell I was carrying guilt about Priscilla's mental health. I kept thinking, maybe if I'd handled things differently, she wouldn't have spiraled so badly. Natasha reminded me that Priscilla made her own choices to stop taking medication and fly across the ocean uninvited. She said setting boundaries wasn't cruel, and that I couldn't fix someone else's mental health by sacrificing my own safety. We spent the whole session working through why I felt responsible for Priscilla's well-being when she'd crossed so many lines. Natasha helped me see that compassion didn't mean accepting harmful behavior. A few days later, Milo called from Seattle with an update about his sister. She was staying in his guest room and going to psychiatrist appointments twice a week. The doctor had gotten her back on proper medication, and she was also doing group therapy 3 times a week. Milo thanked me for being patient through everything and for not pressing charges beyond the protection order. He said Priscilla was starting to understand that her behavior had been inappropriate, though she still had a long way to go. About a month after the court date, I was getting coffee at my usual spot when someone called my name. It was one of Priscilla's old friends from college who I hadn't seen in over a year. She asked how I was doing and mentioned she'd heard about everything that happened. She told me Priscilla had reached out to apologize for involving her in drama and actually admitted her behavior had been wrong. It felt strange hearing about Priscilla's life from this distance, but also safer somehow. The friend said Priscilla seemed to be doing better with medication and therapy, which was good to hear. Around this time, I started talking to someone new through a dating app. Her name was Sarah, and she worked as a graphic designer downtown. On our second date, I decided to be upfront about the whole situation with my ex. I explained about the protection order and the general craziness without going into every detail. Sarah appreciated the honesty and said everyone had some kind of baggage from past relationships. She wasn't scared off by the drama, which felt like a good sign. We took things really slow with just coffee dates and walks in the park for the first few weeks. 3 months after the protection order, Milo called with another update. Priscilla had gotten a job teaching English online to kids in China, which let her work from home. She'd also moved into her own studio apartment in Seattle and was keeping up with all her treatment requirements. Most importantly, she hadn't tried to contact me at all and seemed to be respecting the court order completely. Milo said the distance and structure were helping her gain perspective on what had happened. He thought she was finally understanding how her actions had affected everyone involved. My therapy sessions with Natasha shifted from crisis management to looking at patterns in my relationships. We talked about how I'd ignored red flags with Priscilla early on because I wanted to help her through her struggles. Natasha helped me see how my need to be helpful had kept me in an unhealthy situation way too long. We worked on recognizing warning signs and understanding the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. I was learning that healthy relationships meant both people taking care of themselves first. One Friday night, Kenta suggested we have a guys' night at his place with just us and some beers. After a few drinks, we actually started laughing about that insane Saturday morning 6 months ago. The image of Priscilla suggesting a threesome while I was dying from the worst hangover became less traumatic and more absurdly funny. Kenta did an impression of me stumbling around in my boxers, trying to process my ex showing up from Japan. We laughed until our stomachs hurt, and it felt good to find humor in something that had been so awful. A few weeks later, Massey texted asking if I wanted to go on a double date with her and her new boyfriend. She'd started seeing this guy who worked at a tech startup, and they seemed really happy together. Sarah and I met them for dinner at this Thai place, and it was surprisingly not awkward at all. Massey joked that she had the best story ever for when people asked how she met her boyfriend's friends. She'd say it involved international flights and protection orders and watch their faces get confused. The four of us actually had a great time and made plans to do it again soon. 5 months after the whole mess started, Milo called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. He said Priscilla had written letters to both me and Massey as part of her therapy program, but he was holding on to them unless we wanted to read them. I told him I wasn't ready for that yet, but thanked him for checking. First, Sarah and I had been dating for about 2 months by then, and things were going really well. I practiced being clear about my needs and boundaries like Natasha taught me in our sessions. Sarah noticed the difference and told me she liked how direct I was about stuff, instead of playing games or being weird about feelings. The protection order was set to expire in a few weeks, and I felt weirdly okay about it. During my session with Natasha that week, she pointed out how much I'd grown since that first emergency appointment when I could barely function. She said the paper order had been important, but now I had real boundaries that didn't depend on a court document. Milo texted me a week later with news that Priscilla was staying in Seattle for good and thinking about going back to the school for counseling. She wanted to help other people with mental health problems after everything she'd been through. It seemed like she'd found something meaningful to focus on during her recovery. 6 months after that crazy Saturday morning, I could finally think about it without my stomach turning. My apartment felt normal again instead of like some place I needed to escape from. Work was going great since I could actually focus again, and Sarah and I were in a really good place. The whole mess had been awful, but I'd learned so much about myself and what I needed in relationships. Kenta decided to throw a small party at our place one Saturday night with just our close friends. He made jokes about checking everyone's bags at the door for international luggage tags, which actually made everyone laugh, including me. Looking around at all these people who'd shown up when everything went sideways made me realize how lucky I was. These were the friends who'd answered panic texts at weird hours and sat with me when I couldn't handle being alone and never once made me feel bad about the drama. Milo sent me one last update about a month later saying Priscilla was doing really well in Seattle with a solid group of friends and hadn't mentioned me in months during their check-ins. We both needed that separation to figure out our own stuff and become better versions of ourselves. I genuinely hoped she was happy, even though I never wanted to see her again. Sunday mornings became my favorite time after all the chaos died down. I'd sit in my apartment with coffee and just enjoy the quiet without worrying about buzzers going off or surprise visitors showing up. No drama or crisis texts or protection orders to think about. Just peaceful mornings in my own space that felt safe again. Sometimes the best ending isn't getting back together or getting revenge or having some big dramatic moment. Sometimes it's just everyone moving forward in different directions and finding their own version of being okay. Priscilla was getting help and building a life in Seattle while I was learning how to have healthy relationships and trust people again. We weren't enemies or friends or anything really. Just two people who'd been through something intense together and came out the other side as different people going different ways. My phone never rang with crisis calls anymore, and my apartment buzzer only went off for food delivery. Sarah would stay over on weekends, and we'd make breakfast together without me worrying about surprise visitors. Kenta and I would grab beers after work and actually talk about normal stuff like sports and movies instead of protection orders and therapy appointments. Life had gotten boring in the best possible way. The whole experience taught me that boundaries aren't mean or selfish, but actually the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved. Letting Priscilla crash into my life over and over hadn't helped either of us. Getting that protection order and forcing distance between us gave us both space to heal and grow. Now I could spot red flags early and actually do something about them instead of making excuses or hoping things would get better on their own. Sarah and I had been together almost 4 months when she mentioned wanting to meet my family, and I didn't panic about it. We drove up to my parents' place for dinner, and I told them the abbreviated version of the Priscilla situation. They were glad I'd handled it responsibly and gotten help instead of trying to tough it out alone. Having their support meant a lot, even though I hadn't wanted to worry them when everything was happening. The protection order expired on a random Wednesday, and I only remembered because Natasha brought it up during our session. She was right, that I'd built real boundaries that didn't need legal enforcement anymore. I knew how to say no and stick to it now. I knew how to recognize when someone wasn't respecting my limits and what to do about it. Those skills would last way longer than any court order. Looking back on everything from this calmer place, I could see how sick Priscilla really was when she showed up that morning. The manic smile and the luggage and the suggestion about Massey all pointed to someone in serious crisis who needed professional help. Getting her connected with real treatment through Milo and the court system probably saved both our lives from spiraling into something even worse. Makes you think, right? Were those heart emojis real support, or just people going through the motions? Hard to say. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Subscribe for more content like this.